Well, thank you for coming. This, I think, is going to be fun because Mez McConnell, our guest here, does not just, as the American political expression goes, does not just pussyfoot around. He actually speaks hard truths, things we need to know. He is senior pastor of Niddrie Community Church in Edinburgh, Scotland. He's been doing that for about 10, 11 years now.
Yep.
Authored 6 books. He's co-authored with his wife Miriam 2 daughters. And he writes about his life growing up in one book called Is Anybody Out There? So let me ask you about that. I understand from your writing that your mom ran off when you were 2 years old.
That's right, yeah.
Leaving you, and you had a 3-year-old sister with your grandma?
Yeah.
Okay. Your dad was away a lot, liked to bet on horses, and not bet very successfully, I suspect?
No, he didn't like to. He liked to bet on horses, watch football, and drink.
Okay. There's a person you refer to as she, your stepmother.
Yeah.
Not a nice person, I gather.
No.
So what did she do to you?
She was highly abusive and violent, yeah.
Okay. So...
I tell you what, Doc, you're getting stuck in straight from the off, aren't you, son?
Exactly. And then going on
Maybe that
to...
guy will wake up over there.
And then going on...
Obviously finding it fascinating, isn't he?
Mez just came over yesterday, so it's about 11 o'clock to his body clock, but he's doing all right, whereas some of us... Anyway, it gets better in Mez's life. At 12, you start taking drugs.
Yeah,
right?
that was much more fun.
Okay. Age what, 16, convicted of assault? Is that about right?
No, age 12.
Age 12, okay. Assaulting who or what or when and where?
Assaulting a couple of people.
Okay, at age 12?
Yeah.
Other 12-year-olds or adults or?
Older people, yeah.
Okay, all right. You had a friend stabbed to death.
Yeah.
What happened there?
He was stabbed to death. He was a friend of mine. We were 15, and actually a girlfriend of mine at the time just took a knife and stuck it straight through his heart.
Okay. And through all this, you are starting to ask spiritual questions, or? Yeah,
I was wondering when my friend died, obviously. One minute we're having a cigarette and having a crack, and the next minute he was bleeding to death in the back of the car on the way to the hospital.
Okay.
And so I began to wonder, where was he, what was happening, what was going on.
Okay. Did you have anyone at that point to help you think through those questions?
Not really. No. I mean, I've grown up in a pretty Irish Catholic sort of background, sporadically, but nobody really know.
Okay. So then you get to be 19, you're in your 20s, you're homeless for a while?
Homeless at 16.
Homeless at 16. Okay. You got involved in a fight in a nightclub, stabbed a couple of people. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Doc, you've got good info on me.
I actually had a good researcher. Is that Harvest Prude standing at the back?
Is that you? Are you like
hand.
FBI or something?
Yeah. So, yeah, she's good.
That's not bad. The ages are pretty good.
Yeah. So, okay, you write that you could have escaped, but you just stood there in a way. After you stabbed these guys, you waited to get caught.
Yeah.
Okay, because at that point you wanted to get caught, or you
I think so. At that point, I was messed up.
Okay.
And so prison seemed like a good idea.
Okay. Then you meet some Christians, right? In prison, or?
No, I'd met some Christians around about the same time as I was involved in the stabbing incident. I'd met some Christians a few months beforehand.
Okay.
And then when I went, I got sent to max security. Then these Christians came to see me in prison, yeah.
Okay, they came to see you.
Yeah.
And what types of things did you talk about with them?
Nothing, I can't remember. I mean, they only came to see me one time. I was like 300 miles from where they lived in a maximum security prison. So you got a 15-minute visit. So they brought me some tobacco and a radio. So they brought me tobacco. That doesn't probably make them very good Christians, does it?
I'm just gonna move right past that one.
You can edit that out of the YouTube thing. They brought me candy and an AV.
Okay, you write that they actually talk to you. They actually talk to me like I was a human being.
Yeah.
Previously, people had talked to you like what?
So previously, when I lived on the streets and I was running around the place, and I'd met these Christians previously, they were very like all in my face about God and sin and heaven and hell, and nothing they said was untrue looking back. But at the time, it was very stark and cold, and just seemed like these sort of rich, sort of preppy-looking dudes.
Okay.
Didn't have a clue about my life, were just driving in their nice cars, telling me how bad I was, then driving back to their perfect lives. And so, and they came to see me in prison. They actually didn't talk about anything spiritual. They just brought me some stuff, asked me how I was doing, and I was actually more affected by the fact that they seemed to genuinely talk to me as a human rather than a project.
Okay. So then you get on probation, right?
I got probation, yeah.
You asked if you could stay with a Christian guy for a while?
Well, I couldn't get parole because the nature of my offences were violent. I was on what we call license for about 20 years. And I didn't have an address. I was homeless. And so the only way I could get parole is if I had an address. And so this Christian dude offered me somewhere to live. And so obviously I'm like, oh yeah, I'll take the address. And that's how I got paroled.
Okay, then what happened? When did you start really hearing about
So I moved to their house, and it was like, quite a nice house, and sort of Christians would come round and do sort of Christian-y things,
Christian-y things,
talk about Jesus and read the Bible and pray and weird stuff like that. And then I would watch these dudes. It was a bit like watching the scene from the Waltons. Right. Like these people just lived in another world to me.
Okay.
I mean, I went around with, murderers, thieves, drug dealers. And so I was just watching these dudes. Wasn't really into it. I was more into the drugs and the violence. But inside I was thinking, man, I wish I could be as chilled out. They didn't seem really affected by life, and they seemed to have like a peace that I never had. My life was just frantic all the time. And so actually one of them invited me away to a sort of Christian youth weekend, which I was very suspicious about.
A Christian youth weekend?
Yeah.
Did you do it?
I did do it, but I set some ground rules. Like, if you try to brainwash me, I'll just murder all of you.
Right. Which would probably keep them quiet a little bit.
Well, at the time, you may remember this, Doc, because you're old enough. David Koresh. Koresh?
Yeah, David Koresh, yeah.
Waco? That was all over the news.
Okay.
So I thought Christian, whack jobs, right?
Right.
They were all in a compound, right? Having a youth meeting or whatever.
Right.
And that went bad. And I'm thinking, come to a youth meeting and hear about Jesus. I'm thinking,
okay.
Waco, right? And so you got to understand culturally, and this is 20 years ago, it's worse now. Culturally, guys from my communities, we don't understand a thing about the Bible or Christianity or anything to do with cultural heritage of the Lord. And so this is just freakish to us. And so I went, just because I owed a few drug dealers money, to be honest, and I just wanted to get out of town for a bit. And I thought, I'm a small guy, but I looked around, I was pretty confident I could take most people. So if they try and brainwash me, I was confident in my ability to handle the situation.
So what happened?
So I heard about weird stuff like the blood of the Lamb and redemption and just weird stuff, right? Words you'd never hear in your life. So I thought that was weird. I observed them. I went to church for the first time, a Welsh chapel.
Okay.
It was just the worst experience of my life. I think I would have rather have done a hard time than go to church.
Okay.
It was just mind-numbing. I didn't understand what was being said. They sort of prayed, as I recall now, it was, and this is not a commentary on that, there was the language as well, old AV language, King James language, and they used the King James. It was very, very just foreign. So I just was bored by it. Although I was interested in Jesus. I quite liked Jesus, because Jesus seemed to me to be a real pain in the neck to people in authority, and that quite appealed to me. And so I left that weekend, and oh, he's awake. He's obviously got an appointment. I left that weekend, decided I'm going to find out more about Jesus. And that's what then started me seriously on the road to the Lord saving my soul, really.
Okay, so how were you going to learn more about Jesus?
Well, I found an old book in this dude's house. It was a Matthew Henry commentary on the Bible.
Okay.
You seen one of those bad boys?
Yeah.
They're bigger than me.
Yeah.
And I got a friend to help me carry it onto a table. I didn't, Doc. I'm pretty strong.
Pretty close.
And so I just read. So I thought, I'll read this thing, right? I mean, I just thought it was a Bible. I didn't know anything. So I read it from start to finish. It took me a couple of months, but I read it. And
now, in Matthew Henry's commentary, he always has the Bible verses there, and then he talks about them, writes about them. So you were getting a lot of Bible and a lot of Matthew Henry on that? Okay, interesting.
So I was just cranking through that bad boy.
Okay. So then what?
I got converted reading the book of Romans. That's a cheeky book to get converted by, right?
And just reading, there wasn't someone...
No, I mean, ask questions. You get to Leviticus and that, your head's battered, right? You know what I mean? You're like, what?
Right.
Don't wear this and that, and, stand in the presence of the aged and stuff. So I was asking people, what's the crack with this? Is this still... And so I was asking Christians questions, and then, I got through that, and then I got into the New Testament, and the book of Romans just resonated with me. Because I'd been taught lies my entire life, largely by social workers and drug counselors. They just lied to me blatantly.
And what were some of the lies that were most common?
Well, the biggest lie was this, that I wasn't really a bad person, that I was a good guy, that had a terrible upbringing, a terribly abusive childhood. I was a product of my environment. And if I had come from a good, stable home with both parents, etc., then I wouldn't have made the life choices I made, etc. And so I'm like, yeah. So, screw you, screw the world.
So basically they're saying you are not responsible.
Exactly, right? I'm a victim, and then I'm confronted with Paul, I'll transliterate, who says, no, son. You need to take responsibility for yourself, for your actions. Boo-hoo, you had a tough childhood, but you are a sinner standing in front of a holy God, and there's no excuse for your sin, regardless of how people mistreated you. And so when I was confronted with my sinfulness, being forced to take responsibility for how I'd lived my life as a rebel against a holy God, man, that just annoyed me no end.
It annoyed you.
Oh, yeah.
But also, it changed you.
Well, it annoyed me, but that's what led me to repentance and faith in Christ. So initially my response was, what? No chance. It's not my fault.
So you had to be annoyed. In other words, if it had just been nice, you're wonderful.
Oh, yeah. If it had been nice, great, it's not your fault, give me a hug. That would just do my nut in, Doc.
Okay. Then what happened from there? Okay, now you're...
So I was converted, gave my life to Christ on my own in a park bench. That's it.
And tell us exactly what happened there. How did you say you gave your life to Christ? What were you thinking? What were you saying?
So I was still on the drugs, right? I was still on the drugs. I was smoking about 60 cigarettes a day. I was a mess, right? And so I'm like, right, how do you do this crack? No one sort of tells you how to be a Christian, right? And so I'm like, right, well, I was going for a walk. I was like, right, what I'm going to do is this, God. I mean, I'm not sure of the theological veracity of this, what happened, but the Lord's pretty gracious, right? So I'm like, so listen, God, we'll do a deal. This is how it's going to go down. I'm going to give up the drugs and, the cigarettes and all, and the just ridiculousness, and you're going to help me understand what this Bible crack is all about and Jesus, right? So I sat down on a bench. I'm like, right, I'm a sinner. Obviously, I'm a sinner. I felt a bit dumb talking to myself, right? But, we'll go with it. I made sure there was no one around. I didn't want to get arrested, right? So I'm a sinner. There's no doubt about that. And that's a fact. I'll take that one on the chin, God. And Jesus died on the cross. I have no idea what that really means. But I know I'm a sinner. And somehow, Jesus dying, I trust in you. You'll forgive me. So just help me do that. Not exactly the sinner's prayer, but probably a bit more theologically rigorous, I would suspect.
Right.
And then that was it. And then I wasn't sure, so I went and talked to this Christian friend of mine. I said, listen, I think I've become one of you Christian-y people. And he's like, what? What's going on? I said, well, you know, I think I'm a sinner. Well, no, I don't. I know I'm a sinner. I know God's holy. I can't sleep at night. I can't stop thinking about God. I can't stop thinking about my sin. I can't stop thinking about Jesus. It's doing my head in. So I've prayed this sort of prayer. Is that good? So he prayed with me, and then I started meeting with this guy. Then almost every day to study the Bible. Then I was just straight into the Bible. I was eating the Bible all day.
So I'm just thinking, you know, in the hymn "Amazing Grace," you know, that saved a wretch like me. Mm-hmm. And there are some people in the United States. I don't know if people do it in Scotland, but there's some people in the United States who say, "Oh, we don't like to say wretch," so they changed the word. You know, that saved someone like me. Yeah. But you had to understand that you were a wretch.
Oh yeah. Right? People who don't like the word wretch, they're wretches, aren't they?
So,
simple as that.
Okay. Now you're actually studying. I mean, you're taking classes. So
no, I'm meeting with a guy.
You're meeting with a guy?
It's a guy in a church who's just meeting with me. I'm asking, you know, it's like when you're first Christian, I'm banging all the questions out, reading the Bible. I'm just like, what about this and this and this? And this guy was just meeting with me, helping me understand the scriptures. Okay. I'd started going to church. I just did not, I just didn't get church. Okay. I didn't like it.
Okay, so then what? You don't like the church. You're reading the Bible. Yeah. You're asking questions. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, do you start thinking, okay, I'm learning this, but I can certainly see in the Bible that church is important, so we have to have better churches?
That took me a long time.
Okay. Just give us the process, because you're 45 right now. Yeah. So we're talking about a 20-year process. Yeah. And so just take us through how that...
Yeah, and so I mean, the first few months, I mean, I'm like every Christian, I was an absolute nut job for Jesus. And so, I mean, I'd be back on the streets, evangelizing my friends, telling them, listen, get off the crack pipe and get to church, or, you're going to hell. Wasn't much more nuance than that. I don't think I'd win your moot debating award. Maybe did they have a street moot? I'd win that. So you can do that. And so a lot of guys were coming to faith, coming off the street. You know what I mean? They're like, anyway, they're always convicting them. But, I mean, I didn't have anything in the armory. I had Jesus saved me. That's it, baby. I couldn't tell you anything else. And so pretty early on, then someone said to me, why don't you try and go to a Bible school or something? I'm like, what? What, that exists? Like a school? You can just go and learn about the Bible? Sign me up for that bad boy. So 9 months in, I went to a seminary, got my first degree, and studied there for 3 years. That was up and down. Then I was in and out. I was a member of a home church, but I wasn't really committed to the church. I was more in love with Jesus. For me, it was Jesus. What the church was sort of just this place you sort of had to go to. I never quite understood why in the early years. You go and sit in a room with loads of strangers, sing songs about Jesus, pretend you like each other, then leave. And then after I left seminary, I became an associate pastor at a church.
What kind of church?
It was a Baptist church. Okay.
In a poor place, or?
Oh, a rich church.
In a rich church.
Oh, yeah. These people were minted, Doc.
Okay. So how was that?
They wouldn't send their kids to a low-life place like this. These people had money, right? Right. And that was terrible. So I resigned after about 8 months.
Why did they hire you?
Because I was a good evangelist, and I was good with their young people. I was on placement there as a seminary student. And then what happened was the minister who hired me left in my last year, and they hired a guy who was he was heterodox. He didn't believe that the Bible was the entire word of God. Then he ran into me, and I'm like, I was working when he got there, and it was just an absolute car crash. Okay. And so I resigned, and then I walked away from the church for about a year.
What did you do during that year?
I went and did some work went back to, me and my wife, lived near our in-laws in England. I did some work. And then an older guy called Stuart Olliott. Have you heard of Stuart Olliott?
I haven't, no.
You ought to Google Stuart Olliott.
How do you spell his last name?
Olyott.
Okay.
So he's an amazingly gifted Welsh preacher from the Martin Lloyd-Jones School.
Okay.
And he got in touch with me and said, look, come and do a master's with me at a theological seminary in Wales. I'm like, nah, I don't want to. He's an old school pastor, really godly, wise. Convinced me to come back. Introduced me to a church that were looking for a youth pastor. I was very suspicious. But you know, I took this guy's advice on board. So this church took me in. They loved me. They sort of nursed me back from the brink, really. So I never wanted to leave the faith. I just didn't like the church, politics, people. It seemed like guys like from my background, we're great for testimony night, but put us in authority, and the middle-class power brokers don't like it.
Okay.
And so I was very suspicious. But anyway, I got over that, repented of my sin, obviously. Was sin in that. Ended up spent a few years there, great years, great church, godly leaders, amazing.
As a youth pastor?
As a youth pastor.
So now, what kind of church was that as far as wealth and poverty? And so
a mix.
Okay. So when you talk with rich kids, I mean, how did you connect with them?
What do you mean, Doc?
Well, you know, when you're talking with someone from your background.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot in common.
Yeah.
What's in common there? I mean,
rich kids are like poor kids, right?
Yeah, but how do they understand when they've been sort of fawned over and everything's come?
Yeah.
You know, how do they understand that they are wretches?
Yeah.
Also.
You just tell them, Doc.
Okay, and they understand because they're.
Well, they do. They're scumbags. They just dress nicer.
Yeah. Okay, so that works. It's not something you don't. There's not a different gospel for rich people or poor people.
No. It's the power of the gospel.
Okay.
It's one gospel. Simple as.
Okay. God saves sinners. We are sinners.
Listen,
God
nicely
is holy.
dressed rich people are the most duplicitous people on the planet.
Because there's a tendency to think.
Because wealth and education and erudition, they're easy masks to hide sin.
Right.
People say, how do you deal with all the drug addicts and losers in your ministry? It must be so difficult. I'm like, no, there's loads of drug addicts and losers in your world. They just hide it better.
Right, yeah.
Easy to hide being a loser when you're driving a nice Mercedes, right?
Yeah, and the kids know that. They can see that.
Oh, yeah, kids knew that, yeah.
Okay.
If they didn't, they knew it by the time we'd finished having a discussion.
Right. Okay, then what?
And then I ended up going to Brazil. At this point I'm married with children, and we'd been pursuing Brazil, street gangs, for some time, and I went and planted a church.
In Rio or?
In this north, in a city called São Luís.
Okay.
Which is right just below the sort of Amazon.
Okay.
So Belém is on the Amazon, and then the next city down below the equator is called São Luís.
Okay.
A city of about 1 million people. And so we started the first Christian ministry to street gangs in the city. So we planted a church, we started a school, we started 2 schools, doctor's surgery, dental surgery. So
okay, same gospel there.
Same gospel, baby.
And people understand.
People understand.
So why is it when
people understand? There's a difference, Doc, between people not accepting and not understanding. People understand. Whether they accept or not is irrelevant, but they understand.
So why do we hear so often, well, you have to be kind of soothing in your sermons, you have to be careful not to alienate anyone, or why do we hear that when it so obviously is ineffective?
Yeah, because people are wretches and they don't like it.
So, okay, so you're in Brazil then, and then you...
Yes, we stayed there 4 years.
Okay.
So a massive, pretty much revival. It was ridiculous. Just people being converted. We grew a church from nothing. And then right bang in the middle of this just amazing period of fruit in our ministry, we felt the Lord saying, you need to leave. We like, Philip in Samaria, and goes from this great ministry of amazing fruit to go and into the wilderness to talk to a eunuch, right?
Okay. That brings you back to Scotland.
That brought us back to Scotland. So I was convicted to come back to Scotland through, basically, on furlough. I was at my dad's 50th birthday. And so we got convicted at that birthday party that we should come back to the UK.
How exactly did that happen?
Do you want the story?
I do want the story, yes.
Right, so the story involves a stripper.
The story,
right.
They know what strippers are.
That's cool. Yeah. So my family aren't believers, obviously. My brothers are doing time for like murder and all sorts of things, right? So I come from a quite dangerous family. And anyway, my stepmother rang me and said, "Oh, your dad's 50th. We're having a surprise party. Will you come?" I'm like, yeah, I'll come. And she said, "Right, well, why don't you pay for the stripper?" And I'm like, "Listen, don't know how many times I need to tell you this, but I'm a minister now. And I'll pay for the DJ, right? But I'm not paying for the stripper, right? That's just not happening." She's like, "Oh, okay. They don't really get it, right?" She's like, "Oh, but it's all God's creation. Surely he likes the naked form and all that." I'm like, "That's a good attempt at exegesis, but not quite where we're going to go." So anyway, I turn up at this do with my wife and that. And this is a rough do, right? And I'm talking, it's a rough do. Guys with guns, more heroin that sink a ship. And then anyway, I come in and everyone's like, "Oh, Mez," because I used to be wild. I mean, I was wild, right? And they're like, "Oh, you're a minister now." And they're all taking the mick, and they had a karaoke, and they were all singing songs, just taunting me, right, all night. And then the stripper comes in, and I'm like, I get up with my wife to leave, and people are all just throwing things at me and just swearing and blah, 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 right? Just loads of abuse. You can imagine it, right? Or maybe you can't, but trust me, these places are rough. And she did her thing and then left, and then I came back in. And then all night for about 4 hours, one after another, all these guys came and sat at my table and told me why their lives were car crashes, train wrecks. And I shared the gospel 40, 50 times. Easy, right, with these dudes. All tough guys.
I'm just thinking of the scene. So you're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Is the stripper still active?
No, she's gone.
She's gone.
So I come back in.
Okay, gotcha.
Trust me, Drucker, there's no stripper evangelism. I mean,
Okay.
I'm pretty out there, but you know what I mean? I'm pretty orthodox, Doc.
All right.
And I've got my clothes on. It's all good at this point.
All right. Glad to hear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're coming up and speaking to me, right? So all these guys have been abusing me, blah, 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 the strip, and da-da-da-da. What's happened, what's changed, da-da-da. And I remember, and then my dad came and sat with me. And I've been estranged from my dad a long time, and my dad's talking to me, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "Listen, Dad." And there was loads of real hardcore gangsters around. A lot of them are actually now dead. And I remember it, and I said to him, "Listen, here's your issue. You need to get yourself along to a church, Pops. You need to get yourself along to a church and hear the gospel." He said, "I hear what you're saying, son, but I haven't got the bottle. I'm too scared to go to church." So you got to imagine this, right? I'm sitting in a room none of you wouldn't last in. Armed people, drug dealers, hardcore criminals. He doesn't blink at that. But he's too scared to go to church because he couldn't handle it. He's too afraid. And immediately I knew we need to come back to the UK because theologically, I'm a theologically Reformed Baptist, right, all the way. And we particularly have left the poor places, the poor communities, and written them off. And there's hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people like my dad and my brothers and my cousins and nephews who are too scared to go to churches, and even if they could go to churches, they don't exist in our communities. And so at that moment I knew, I'm like, now we got to leave and come back and do ministry in our communities in the United Kingdom. And then that's when I came to Scotland.
Okay. So then how long have you been at your church?
This is 11 years
11
now.
years. Okay. And now you're planting other churches, I understand.
Yeah, so now we have, including us, we have 7 churches or plants in 5 cities.
Okay. And how do you train then the people who are coming in to be pastors there? Or do they What's your process then of trying to, in a sense, give them the same DNA that you have?
I mean, you can't give the DNA that I have because we really need a new generation of what we call cultural outsiders.
Okay.
So we need a generation of young men and women who are willing to forego the comforts of life and move into our communities, plant and revitalize churches, and grow a new generation of indigenous converts who will then, in 10 or 20 years, be the future church leaders. We're miles away. I mean, people in my scheme haven't had a gospel church for 30, 40, 50 years. We're in a mess, a really bad mess, and it's going to require a true old-school pioneering missionary mindset. The problem we've got in the UK is that Christianity is almost encased in a middle-class, tertiary-educated bubble. And what happens with tertiary-educated middle-class people is this is how they see the world. You have children, you get a house, you get married, you get a nice house or whatever, get a job, get a house. You get your kids, save up for their kids' university education. They save up, they get to university, they want to go and they want to get a house and da-da-da-da-da. But nobody wants to come into the hard, poor communities. Everybody wants to escape from those and move up the ladder. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, well, I don't quite read the Bible like that. And we've left huge, historically, Reformed evangelicals were at the forefront of true mercy ministries, hospitals, schooling for the poor. And we've left that behind. And we've left this whole swathe of the population to theological fruitcakes, mm-hmm. Charismatic fruit nuts, liberals, and the Reformed Church needs to get a grip of itself.
So a lot of middle-class churches in the United States set up mercy ministries.
Yeah.
And I take it from what we were talking about at dinner is that you're not really thrilled with that typical approach. What's the problem with that you see?
I think most mercy ministries in most churches in the Western world need to be closed down today because they're not helping the poor at all. In fact, they're doing the reverse. They're helping middle-class Christians feel good about themselves because they're helping poor people, or they think they're showing the love of Jesus to poor people because they've opened a soup kitchen or given them a handout. But in actuality, they're not really helping anybody, not in the long term anyway, and certainly not in a biblical fashion.
Okay, so what is showing the love of Jesus? What should that really mean? What should that really look like?
Showing the love of Jesus is first and foremost in proclaiming the truths of the gospel. Jesus came because there's a problem, right? It's no good saying there's not a problem or denying the problem or taking out the word wretched because it offends people. Jesus came because there's a sin problem that needs to be dealt with. Doesn't matter whether you live behind a gated community or whether you live under a bridge. You are separated from a holy God because of your sinful rebellion. And people need to hear, listen, eternal hell is a reality. But here's the good news, baby. You don't have to go there. Well, if you turn from your sinful lifestyle and put your faith and trust in Christ alone for salvation, and he'll forgive you. That's the good news. And so I think first and foremost, I can't remember your question, but first and foremost, mercy ministry and showing the love of Jesus is preaching the gospel of Christ. And if you don't get that, you're an idiot, in my opinion.
So a lot of mercy ministries really emphasize passing out food and so forth. Is that actually counterproductive because it might keep people in poverty rather than challenging them to with this desperate spiritual needs? Or how would you, let's say a church, let's say someone who reads World and reads what you've just said, and that really resonates with them. And they're thinking, okay, how do I turn my church from something that's just kind of a government look-alike passing out food but not really proclaiming Jesus? Where would such a church start? What's the...
So I mean, I'm involved in church planting now, nearly 20 years. And so often guys who like to be trendy and dead on will say to me, I'm thinking about starting a mercy ministry, helping out, taking my launch group or my core group and my home group or my small group, and we're going to go and help at a soup kitchen in the city just to show the world the love of Jesus. And I'm like, why? Or they're going to start one in the church. And my question is, why? Why are you starting this? What's the purpose of it? To show the love of Jesus. Okay, what's the love of Jesus? Well, just to show people that, Christians love, whatever. What's the purpose? The purpose of any activity we take as Christians and in the world is at its basic core missionary. And what I mean by that is we exist to serve Jesus, don't we? And to proclaim the gospel to the dying world, regardless of what that looks like. And so the purpose of any ministry in the church, whether it's youth ministry, music ministry, whatever, you guys have a ministry for everything, right, Americans? And mercy ministry is surely at its base to reach out with the love of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay, I can dig that. But in mercy ministry, this is what happens. So 50 homeless guys turn up at your soup kitchen or your food pantry, whatever you want to call it, right? And you're handing out food, and maybe you chat to a couple of them about Jesus, and it's high fives. 50 people came last night, were a roaring success, right? But the problem is the next week, the same 50 guys come. And 6 months later, it's the same 50 guys. 12 months, 2 years. Listen, I was in soup kitchens for 6 years. I know the drill. Mm-hmm. And the same core of people are coming. And what's happening is they're not being helped to be moved on. They're just using that situation to get what they need. Let me put it another way. So in the sort of international development community world, Red Cross, etc., there was 3 main principles in what they call mercy. So there's relief, rehabilitation, and development. You've read this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so relief is, for instance, a tsunami wipes through a town. What's relief do? Relief goes in. It doesn't ask, should I carry the Bible or should I carry bread, right? Shut up. Relief goes, we go in and we help people. We don't question what's going on. We get them on their feet, right? Stage 2 in development is rehabilitation. And rehabilitation says, right, we've helped them, we've dealt with the immediate emergent crisis. Now we need to try and help these people rehabilitate themselves to their standard of living pre-crisis. You see? So pre-tsunami, they had houses, etc. Well, let's get them. That's rehabilitation. But the third stage of development is the international development is development. Funnily enough, let's help people develop beyond their pre-crisis conditions to help others. What churches have done is this: they've looked at that model. Often unwittingly, often they've not thought about it like this, and they've just gone for relief. So most mercy ministry in churches is a relief mindset. Let's give people stuff. It's not wrong to give people food. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying it's being done wrong. Let's give them food. Let's give them clothing. Let's give them, whatever, vouchers. I'm fine with that. But 10 years later, if that's all you've done, you've never taken anybody out of relief. You've kept them a prisoner there. And so if you think, let's Christianize it, let's go for evangelism, discipleship, and service. That's how I do it. So my relief is evangelism. You know what the immediate relief you need in this situation? Of course, I'll give you some food. You need Jesus. And then I need to disciple you. I need to disciple you and show you and teach you and model to you what it means to be a Christian and to go in Christ. And then when I read the Bible, I read this. My job as a pastor is to prepare all God's people for works of service, not just the ones with university degrees, but the guys with no teeth and tattoos. They've got a service. They're saved to serve Jesus. And so in my development, I call it service. My job is to get the guy from the soup kitchen. The Lord saves them, that's his job. Disciple them and then equip them for works of service. But pretty much 100% of all westernized mercy ministries in local churches stops at relief. Years after we should have moved people on. And what I'm saying is, how many guys from my background, Doc, do you know who are pastors, preachers, and teachers? And when you think of the billions of dollars a year piled into these so-called ministries of mercy by Christians, if that was the business world, the outcomes are so ridiculously negligible. But Christians just persist on doing these things to ease their consciences.
Yeah.
Rant over.
Yeah. Questions from any of you who either want to ease your consciences or do something useful?
You want to do something useful? 20schemes.com. Check us out. We do interns. We take interns, summer interns, long-term interns. Right. Savannah loves us.
Schemes, by the way, is not what it means on this side of the Atlantic, where it means something nefarious.
Yeah, it means that as well.
It means that. Okay. All right. Let's see. Over here.
Hi, thanks for coming. And maybe I just missed it, but I was just wondering, what changed for you from viewing church as a place you have to go to do the Christian thing to, realizing that it's a community of people, that it enriches spiritual life.
Yeah, so it was a process for me. So even as I went to Brazil as a missionary, I just thought of the church as something getting in my way of my mission from God, right? And I went out to work in street children's orphanages. I'm thinking, right, I'm gold for that. That's got me written all over it, right? And so I went out there in Brazil, and that really opened my eyes, because the mercy ministry that I saw going on was an absolute joke. People are sending millions of dollars a year to Brazil, orphanages, and these places are like merry-go-rounds. Kids come in, they leave, they come in, they leave, they come in, they leave, they come in. There was no real accountability, they weren't, these ministries, and I'm not saying we should shut orphanages down, I'm just saying these ministries were usually in isolation. Even looking at some missionaries detached from local churches. Me and my wife felt detached, didn't really have any close support. And so in my second year in Brazil, I decided we need to do something. We can't have I started two strands of my ministry. One was called direct action, one was called prevention. Direct action was just let's get kids on the street. But prevention was, we traced the source. What's the source of the street children in our city? We traced it to one community. So we said, why don't we just plant a church in that community and try and stop this generational, because these are 5th, 6th generation street children. And so I call myself the accidental church planter. So I just planted a church on my own. Ridiculous now when you're looking back, ridiculous. I would have failed every testing metric for being a church planter. I was a lunatic. The Lord blessed it. We saw people converted, and I began to read stuff by 9 Marks, guys like that, and began to really appreciate, hang on a minute. What people like me need is not just more people like me to hang out with and talk about Jesus, but what people like me need and people like you need is people who are different to us, who rub up against us the wrong way, who teach us, who help us understand the world. And slowly but surely, I came to a real love and realization, actually the healthiest mercy ministry in the world is a healthy, gospel-loving church. And we had more. I opened 3 or 4 homes in Brazil with hundreds of street children when I was there. Do you know how many children I got off the streets in 4 years? None. 0. 100% of all the children I worked with were murdered. Okay? I did nothing. And yet, we've had... I left Brazil 10 years ago, and I went visiting last year to a school. We started a preschool. Just 10 kids a year, part of the church, teaching about the gospel. And in 10 years, they told me 400 children had graduated from that school. that ordinarily would have been on the streets. And so direct action failed, but this church at the heart of the community, living out Jesus, opening a school, 10, 20, it's grown to about 40 or 50 kids a year now, teaching them the Bible, teaching them to read and write, teaching them that there's a better way, has had more success when I've not been there than I had when I was there. And so for me, these things, and I just grew in love for the local church. It's a pain in the neck, don't get me wrong, the local church, but it's Christ's bride and he loves her.
Down here in front.
What is your biggest challenge? What is your biggest challenge in planting churches in Scotland?
Money. So I could sell that thing there and probably fund one of my interns for a year. So church planting is an expensive game, particularly in my end of the market, because most church planting models in the Western world right now are based on a 3 to 5 year business plan. So a guy comes in, he gives you a presentation, he tells you, shows you his community, tells you what he's going to do about it. Give me this much money. Within 3 to 5 years, we'll be fiscally independent. I can't do that. All I can say to you is it's going to cost me a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of time, and maybe half my plants will fail. That's not a great sell next to a guy who's guaranteeing you 100% come back on your money. And so that's a big problem. The other thing is people. One of the biggest needs we have right now is women. We are absolutely desperate for mature, godly, young women who love the Lord, love the Bible. So pretty much 55% of all people live in schemes are women. About 90% of them have been abused sexually. About 85% of them have some underlying mental health issue. And so evangelism's easy. Our problem is discipling women. And so it's not appropriate for men to have intensive discipleship relationships the way we do discipleship, which is day in, day out, life on life. And so we have a real need for solid, theologically rigorous, mature young women willing to give their lives for Jesus. So ladies, maybe the Lord's calling you to Scotland and not to marry Rupert and have 3 children and live in a nice house.
But it sounds like you're not looking to set up anti-poverty programs. You're looking to set up churches.
Yeah, I mean, the church is the best anti-poverty program on earth.
And so parachurches, is there a role for them? And if so, what? Well, let it out. Speak frankly.
Let it out. I feel like you're like my shrink doc. I feel like we should have got like a little sofa for me and stuff. You know what I'm saying, son? Right. Yeah, look. I think there's definitely a role for parachurches. I think that in our communities, they've caused us more problems than they've resolved.
How so?
Let me find something, Doc. I was just reminding myself of this book I reviewed on my blog. Just talk amongst yourself. So I read this book, and this is a cracking little book, Doc. I'm not think it's Christian, but it's called The Alternative by Mauricio Miller.
Okay.
And it's basically, the subtext is most of what you believe about poverty is wrong. And so this dude wrote this book, and it's basically a critique of the social services in the United States. And this guy's been in the social services for 3 decades, right? It's basically, he's not a Christian. His basic premise is in order for him to get funding, he had to show how poor people were. And so they couldn't celebrate the successes. The more successes they had, the less funding they got. Right. And so their whole system was predicated on making sure you got the worst of the worst, elevated them, and made sure your figures didn't fall below certain percentages, otherwise you lost funding. It's a very, very fascinating book about the corruption.
So the Alternative by? The
Alternative by Mauricio L. Miller. Or Mauricio.
Okay.
So listen to what he says. He says, to qualify for my social security programs, people had to highlight their weaknesses, their deficiencies. The more helpless you presented yourself to be, the more eligible you were for my services.
Yeah.
See that?
Well, that's in the United States. We have these federal programs, SSI and SSDI, that you have to, again, be as miserable as possible and perhaps even drug your children in order to be able to get them on the... So what can you point out? I mean, the criticism, I think, is really necessary and important. Are there examples of doing it right that you can point to? And if so, for example, if World were to send a reporter, okay, show us Mez. Show us, Mez, what's working. Where should that reporter go?
No idea.
Okay.
Look, I'm not saying I've got it right. I'm just critiquing it from both sides of the fence, right? I think a healthy ministry to the poor should be more than a weekly handout. We've clarified that. I think, so people, the critique I often get is this in my own critique, because it's quite a controversial opinion, right? Even the fact that, I'll say this because people get freaked out by this, but even the fact, politically, I'm pretty much a socialist, but I don't sound like one, right? Which confuses everybody because they don't understand what it means, and it means different thing here than it means in Europe, by the way. I want every church to have a mercy ministry, but I don't want it to be about relief. I want a mercy ministry where you do reach the poor, but when that guy or girl comes in, that there is a pathway in your church to service, that this person isn't just seen as a project. So if they've come in, they're a bit smelly, they're not really very articulate, they don't really fit in with our sort of crowd, and so they get quickly isolated. They don't get invited to things, etc. So you need a comprehensive discipleship program. When they get converted, who's going to disciple them? Who's going to invite them if they're living in a hostel for battered women or something? Who's not just going to disciple them? Who's going to say, get out of there and move in with me? That's mercy ministry. That's showing the world the love of Jesus. Not keeping them at arm's length and giving them stuff. Oh, we love you. But, don't come around my house. People live in my house, lived in and out of my house for 20 years. People in out my church, they live in people's houses. So when I get the critique, you're not loving, I'm like, no. How many murders have you had live with you? How many rapists and guys, men and women in an absolute mess? So I'm looking for better mercy ministry, done holistically, done with the whole person in view, done with a discipleship mindset that's got an objective in mind that says, look, right, you might be on a downer right now, right? Life might be rock bottom for you right now. But with Jesus, one, your soul can be saved. Two, your life can be turned around. But your job is not to just take stuff off people anymore. Your job is now to serve the King of the universe. And I'm going to help you, and the local church body is going to give you and equip you with the tools to do that. I mean, I had a guy mentally damaged, almost beyond repair. Came to me at 42, maybe. A complete nut job. Got converted, barely able to function. Got a job, got converted, came through my discipleship program, got his first job as a toilet cleaner in the city centre. Man, that guy was proud. Mez, I'm paying taxes for Jesus. Isn't that amazing? I mean, his taxes were negligible, right? But you know what? Praise the Lord, right? That's mercy ministry. The guy was taken for years and years and years and years and years. And yeah, he's got a low-paid job. Yeah, he's not going to rise much above that in his life. But I'll tell you what, that guy's the best toilet cleaner for Jesus you've seen in your life. That, my friend, is success. That's what I take it to see.
Okay. Time for maybe one more question. Anyone?
It's a quiet crowd, right?
It's a good crowd. I mean, basically, in a way, we like to be producers. We don't want to just be consumers. Is that, I mean, this guy wanted to work. He wanted to be proud of what he was doing.
But largely, cultural Christianity in the West is consumerist.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Harvest gets the last question of the week because she has done so much through her research.
What's her name? Harvest?
Harvest.
That is the coolest name
Isn't that a
ever,
cool name?
Harvest.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. You said earlier that evangelism is easy. What's the role of theology in evangelism?
I don't understand the question, Harvest.
Sorry. What's the role of, beyond just, not just the gospel, but beyond the gospel, when you're discipling, what's the role of teaching them the Bible the way you kind of got taught yourself?
So, clarify to me what you think theology is, Harvest. Just in a sentence.
Learning about who God is and how we're supposed to respond to that.
Okay. A couple of things. Every time we open our mouths about Jesus, it's a theological statement. So everything we say is theology. So you can't separate evangelism from theology. I'm trying to understand the question. I'm not trying to be facetious. So,
let me
evangelism is theology. Theology is evangelism.
One thing you were saying at dinner is that there's a tendency of people, ministers going into poor communities to start thinking, well, we have to dumb things down.
Yeah.
Okay? And you were saying, no, I mean, these folks may be poor, but they're not stupid.
Yeah.
And you actually have to treat them as they are, intelligent people able to actually discuss things like that. Is that, okay?
Oh, yeah, so, yeah, okay. So, listen, we shouldn't confuse poverty with stupidity. And often that gets done, right? I mean, most of the New Testament was written to people who never read, never seen a book. Never mind. Imagine first century Christians walking through this place, going into your bookshop. They'd freak out, wouldn't they? They'd pass out. And yet you read the book of Romans, Paul's not messing about, is he, theologically? He's not dumbing it down. And so I reject out of hand completely. We preach the gospel. We preach the word of God in its entirety. We preach it simply and we preach it as clear as we can. If I feed my children McDonald's every night, they might love that, right? But it's not going to be good for them, is it? And so they need a healthy, balanced diet. It's the same with my people, They need meat. They need a big, fat steak, A few vegetables now and then. We don't eat many vegetables where we come from, but you have to throw them in to look good. But you need a healthy, balanced diet. And I get annoyed at these people in the name of love and compassion who say that somehow we can't grapple with deep theological truths or doctrine. I mean, theology and doctrine is life, isn't it? And so if you don't teach us the truth, if you don't give us the whole counsel of God, then you're robbing us, you're hurting us. If you don't teach us about hell, that's the most unloving thing you could do to a person. I mean, it's disgraceful. And so, is that enough?
That's enough. Please join me in thanking Mez McConnell for coming tonight.
Cool.